So yeah, I watched She-Hulk, and it was really average. Now, I've already spoken about this on my channel, but Marvel fatigue really is increasing as the months go by, and it just shows no signs of stopping as Marvel just continues to produce more and more just mediocre shows with average writing at best, and really questionable CGI. Seriously, I feel really sorry for the VFX team at Marvel who've been worked to death over these past few years, and unfortunately, She-Hulk is no exception to this. Granted, there are only 3 episodes of She-Hulk that have been released, and I wouldn't want to write off the show off as being completely unwatchable garbage. Maybe the show might flip my entire opinion of it on its head in the next few episodes, and this video would have aged like 10-year-old milk, and I would just look like a stupid dum-dum. But until that happens, I'm here to tell you, or give you an overview of my thoughts on the 3 episodes of She-Hulk that have released. Now granted, I do want to say there are going to be some specific spoilers for the show of She-Hulk in this review. If you really don't want that, go watch the show if you really feel like watching it, but I wouldn't really advise it. It's not really worth your time. So like I said at the beginning of this video, She-Hulk isn't like the worst garbage television show to ever release ever since like Game of Thrones season 8. This show really only commits one major sin, the fact that it's just really boring. Like, they're not messing up that badly with the show, it's just that it doesn't really do anything that hasn't already been done a million times before in like 10,000 million other Marvel IPs. Granted, for this, I did think that the first episode of She-Hulk was alright. I actually kind of enjoyed it. Granted, it was the best episode of the show in my opinion. Everything after this just kind of goes downhill. Now, the episode opens up with Jennifer Walters basically breaking the fourth wall, which is a nice nod because she does do that a lot in the comics, and does like a in media res. Now, that's when we learn about her relationship to Bruce, and they're in a car together driving down the road to, I have no idea where they're going, but then they get interrupted by this terribly CGI ship that honestly looks so bad. Like, I couldn't believe it when I saw it, and then they crash off of the side because Jen swerved too hard, to avoid the terrible CGI ship. Now, this is where my first problem with the show is, and though granted it's a bit of a nitpick in my opinion, it really bugged me when it happened. The way that Jennifer gains She-Hulk powers, so basically they get into the crash, and then she carries Bruce out, and Bruce is bleeding, and she has an open wound on her arm, and his blood happens to drip into her arm, and I just kind of thought that was really stupid way to make it that she turns into a Hulk and explains the way that she becomes the She-Hulk. Honestly, I would have preferred if they had just both been knocked out, and then they perhaps wake up in a hospital, and then the people at the hospital perform a blood transfusion with Bruce and Jennifer because she had lost a lot of blood, and that's the way that, that she gained the power of becoming a Hulk. And after Jennifer becomes a She-Hulk, she goes on a little rampage, and then we cut, and then she wakes up on an island where Bruce has apparently been living for the past few years, and now he's back to being Smart Hulk again. And I know this is just a bit of a side tangent, but I really hate how they handle Smart Hulk in the MCU. Not because I hate Smart Hulk, okay? Smart Hulk is alright, but I just really hate the fact that all the development for Smart Hulk, all the development for Bruce in general really, was done off screen, so it just completely ruins his character in the MCU in my opinion, but side tangent anyway. So then Bruce is really trying to help Jennifer to control herself, and she's very much adverse to the new powers she has, stating that she really doesn't want them that much comparatively to, her normal life as a lawyer, which is much different than the comic version of Jennifer. In my limited knowledge of the comics, okay, I'm not the She-Hulk professor, right? I've only read a couple. Is that Jennifer actually isn't that confident in herself as Jennifer Walters, and it is only after she becomes She-Hulk she becomes confident and is actually really happy with the way she is as She-Hulk, spending more time as She-Hulk rather than just as Jennifer Walters. And it's the main difference between Bruce and Jennifer is that Jennifer treats the She-Hulk persona as more of a gift rather than Bruce treating his Hulk persona as a curse. And this is the main difference between the two characters, is that Jennifer treats the fact that she can become the She-Hulk as a blessing, meanwhile Bruce resents the fact that can transform into the Hulk. And it's probably one of the most integral parts of Jennifer's character is the fact that she was not confident as Jennifer Walters, but instead becomes confident as the She-Hulk. However, in the show you don't really get that feeling, because the Jennifer Walters in this version of She-Hulk has everything figured out. Like, she's a girl boss, and she has everything done for her. She never really ever struggles throughout the 3 episodes at all. For example, like in the second episode, due to the actions of her defeating a supervillain during a court trial in the first episode at the end, she gets fired from her lawyer firm. Now, this is great conflict for Jennifer, can create conflict within her if she wants to continue pursuing this She-Hulk persona, or it could even make her further resent the She-Hulk persona. However, the problem gets solved like 5 minutes or 10 minutes into the episode, where she gets offered a new job at a better lawyer firm. That's one of the main problems in the show, is that Jennifer never really faces any real conflict. Almost all of her conflict is either immediately solved or it's completely pointless, because Jennifer is just that much of a girl boss, and it really creates a really boring show. Now, apart from all the cringe from everything, like the comedy, which is, as usual in Marvel fashion, is just overly done at this point. Like, they need to seriously lay off the jokes. Not everybody needs to be Tony Stark. You don't need to make every single Marvel IP Thor Ragnarok. Not everybody has to be witty and charming to be a good character. But aside from all of that and everything else in the show, the real flaw in it is that there is no conflict for Jennifer at all. So it just leads to boring, mindless, senseless events just happening. Jennifer never has to face any real consequences or conflicts within the 3 episodes that have aired. Now, in the last episode of the show, they tried to set up some kind of villain, but it doesn't really work because they make the goons seem like pathetic, stupid idiots, because she's the She-Hulk. Who is going to go up against the She-Hulk and win? So that's really the main point of the show that's just really bad about it. It's just that it's terribly boring, and sprinkle on top a bunch of cringe moments where Jennifer is just acting like an entitled rat and an overall mean-spirited and mean person to Bruce for no reason during that one scene, you know, the one that everybody and their grandmother was taking a dump on. It just makes a really boring show with really mediocre writing, alright CGI. Sometimes she just looks like Fiona from Shrek, and really overplayed, overdone jokes that add nothing to the show. Now, as I said before at the beginning of this video, there have only been 3 episodes that have been released for She-Hulk, so I would not write it off as complete and utter garbage, okay? They may turn it around somehow. I don't know how they will do that, but if they do, they might be the best writers of all time, and I just look like a stupid idiot. But until then, She-Hulk is just really not worth watching. If you enjoy the show, that's good, okay? I'm not saying you can't enjoy the show. These are just my thoughts about the show. So yeah, thanks for listening. Later.